Public Works Board to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Picard?
Here.
Ms. Curler?
Here.
Mr. Polachek?
Here.
Mr. Rupplinger?
Here.
Mr. Reich? I do not see Mr. Reich in attendance. And Mr. Temperley previously informed staff that he'd be unavailable for this evening's meeting.
Okay. Next on our agenda is correction and or approval of the minutes of June 14th. Anybody wish to make any corrections or wish to make a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from the June 14th Public Works Board meeting.
Second.
All right. Motion and second to approve the minutes. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Item 4 on the agenda is questions and public comment. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 5.
Yeah, this is Catherine Bishop. I was here for public comment.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just slow on the mute button. No, my apologies.
My apologies. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Catherine Bishop. I am a member of the Lake Mills City Council, and I'm one of the sponsors of the ATV use ordinance for the city. And so I just wanted to speak quickly and address the issues, why I brought this forward, what it does and what it doesn't do, and I'll try to do this quickly. First off, the issues are that the surrounding municipalities have all basically adopted ATV use ordinances. And so what that does is it creates an issue where our Lake Mills City residents, if they drive or use ATVs, have to go out of the city and trailer their vehicles out of the city for that use. It also creates an instance where surrounding users have to literally go outside of our city limits to get to other places. And that means they can't get to see people here or visit businesses here in the city of Lake Mills. And I would say the city really is a hub for some of those business activities that these people are missing out on and that businesses are now missing out on. So first off, what the ordinance does is it designates all official city roads and county highway segments within the jurisdiction of the city as ATV routes, so long as they're signed in accordance with Wisconsin law. One item of this ordinance that is more strict than Wisconsin restrictions is that users in the city of Lake Mills would have to be 16 years or older with a driver's license. So I do want to point that out as one of our safety requirements that we've added in. Also, any other operation of an ATV or UTV would have to be in accordance with Wisconsin state law. And I bring that up because a lot of people, and you've probably heard from constituents, or maybe you have your own concerns about, well, there should be decibel requirements or there should be registration. And the Wisconsin statutes actually are very, they have significant requirements for those items. And that's why you don't see them specifically outlined in our ordinance here for Lake Mills, because to rewrite the entire Wisconsin statute would be 300 pages, and I didn't do that. Instead, I incorporated those Wisconsin statute provisions merely by reference, and I think that takes care of a lot of those issues, and I hope that you'll see that when you review the ordinance. And then finally, well, that kind of got into it. Let me cover one other thing. The costs would also be mostly covered by the Quad County runners, and so the cost to the city is minimal. I just mentioned that I didn't bring in a lot of the Wisconsin statute ordinances and why I did that. But I do want to cover specifically the signage requirements, which I think may be a discussion here tonight. And in my review of the current Wisconsin statutes and the current requirements, I feel that the signage as proposed in a map that you have in your agenda items is sufficient to meet the Wisconsin state rules and is sufficient for both ATV users and motorists to understand the rules in our city without being cluttered or convoluted. So I do encourage you to take a look at that map. It accounts for all of the entrances to the city, and as I said, I think that's sufficient per our Wisconsin statutes. So I'll stand by and I'll be here for the meeting for any questions. I hope that covers some initial issues that you may have had in reviewing this, and I hope that you approve the resolution and recommend that the ordinance is adopted as written. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Any other input from public? Okay, seeing none. Item 5, Director's Report.
Thank you. All right, a couple of quick items here. First of all, under the AMI update, we are moving slowly but surely We are now able to install more of the water meters, and it's going as fast as the supply will allow us to go. So we are still continuing to work on that. In regard to staffing, we still have 3 openings, the same ones we had last month. We are planning interviews for the electric lineman position next week, and we are still looking to get some good applications for the wastewater treatment plant. So in the meantime, we've got 2 guys operating basically what's a 4-man plant, putting in a lot of extra hours, doing a heck of a job. It's disappointing in that there are some things that should be done that haven't been done for a while. So we're trying to do a little cross-department work in that regard. But we'll continue to keep that posting open and certainly do our best to get some good candidates for that position. But it is frustrating without a doubt.
May I ask a follow-up on that?
Yes, please.
Some of maybe you could elaborate just a little bit on what are some of the things that aren't getting attention at the wastewater treatment plant, and sort of what are the risks if that continues long-term?
Sure. There's some routine maintenance that we do, like jetting of sewers. You know, we typically have a monthly schedule, and we aren't able to do those as often as possible. Now, the nice part about that is that's something that we can cross-department, so we will do that. And the other one is just there's a general cleaning of the plant that isn't getting done on a regular basis. Those would be the 2 big ones. And so what happens then is it becomes I wouldn't say emergency, but it's something that you have to drop what you're doing on one job to go do this job. One of the things is cleaning the belt thickener and that sort of thing, so they don't do that nearly as often. We've been lucky, I think, so far that we haven't had any equipment fail as a result. And I can tell you the 2 guys that are there, Bill and Ken, again, are putting in extra hours and making sure that all of the essentials are being done, all of the DNR reports are being done, that sort of thing. But there's just a few things that typically we do, like the jetting, that they're just falling behind on.
Well, please give them our thanks for their extra efforts.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. I'll pass that along. Staying with the wastewater treatment plant then, we had tried to schedule a special meeting to talk about this different process for treating the sludge. And I don't know why, but there seems to be a lot of meetings right now. I'm looking at Mr. Waters over here because he's scheduling meetings constantly. Just kidding, just kidding. But it's just a busy time. And so we're going to move that to August. And so we'll have a representative of a company called Aqua Aerobics. And I have to explain, that's not water exercise. That's Aqua Aerobics is the name of the company. But they have a process that they want to show us. And I'm just going to give you a heads up that the August meeting has the potential to be pretty busy. So just be ready for that. The other thing we're doing with the wastewater treatment plant is it's time for us to visit all of our permit holders. We've got 5 of them right now, and it's kind of a regular thing just to check in and see how things are going, see if what they were doing 3 or 4 years ago when we visited them, that they're still doing that. And then we've got a couple of other businesses that we just want to stop in and see if they need some sort of permit or some restrictions on what they're doing, what kind of waste they're sending to the plant. So we're going to do that probably later this year. And we do work with our consultant Strand to help us with that. So it'll be a representative from Strand, probably Bill and myself, that make these visits, but they're very important. So we'll be doing that. And then the final thing I've got, you asked me when we put together this unit pricing contract last year to kind of give you a heads up as to when we are going to be working with Peeper Systems. And so we do have, between $40,000 and $50,000 worth of work that we want them to do this year. Of that amount, about $10,000 is actually being done for private customers or individual customers, so we'll be reimbursed that cost. But what we're trying to do yet is get rid of some of these backyard overhead right-of-ways. So we'll be working on Elm and Linden, Westlake and Ferry, and then the residents, one is in Shorewood Hills and the other one is out on County B, out by the packaging or the liquor store out there. We, as a part of that contract, we built in, or it was built in that there would be some kind of an escalator if costs changed, and we use that or identify those based on a statewide, or actually it's a national registry of how costs are going. And so our costs from last year to this year are going to go up 9.7%. We did set this up as a 2-year program, so at the end of this year, we'll reevaluate it and see if we want to either continue this particular contract or rebid it and move forward with another company or another contract. So that's what I've got for today. Please.
Another follow-up on the wastewater treatment plant, sorry for jumping back, but I know the city council had asked for kind of a financial analysis of some of the alternatives and funding options for the new wastewater treatment plant, and can you just give us a sense of what's the timeline on that and when we might be able to hear about that? Maybe Steve knows.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you 2 things real quick, that we aren't actually quite that far in the design process. We're still actually looking for sites and that sort of thing. And we're still gathering information about what kind of grants, loans, clean water loans, et cetera, might be available. We're also beginning to explore if there are some grants available for renewable energy or establishing this as a LEED plant. So we're looking at that, but I can't give you anything solid now. Is that pretty good, Steve?
Yeah, the consultant who's doing the financial study was working with the engineer on certain features of where we were headed, and so that's going to be a crucial part of it. So it's probably out another 3 or 4 months yet.
Okay.
And I should have mentioned, I will tell you that when we talked to the Aqua Aerobics folks the first time, they thought that there would be a cost savings in the plant construction. Now, we haven't pursued them or pushed them on that yet, but hopefully that'll be one of the questions we ask them in August. Their statement to us was there would be some offsets in the construction and then possibly some lower operating costs also. So that, of course, caught our ear. So we want to hear about that.
So there are other issues, though, that tie into that, like the egg study and the soil study and some of the acquisition issues. So there are a lot of topics we have to resolve before we actually can start doing some hard numbers.
Any other questions on the director's report? All right, moving on then to number 6, discussion recommendation on amending City of Lake Mills Ordinance 609, vehicles all-terrain. And I suppose we should have, before moving into the discussion phase, a motion. And we do have a prepared motion. Where was that?
2271.
Thanks. Yep, 22-7-1.
I'll make a motion to hear what is it? Motion 22-7-1. Am I right with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is Bennett. Do we have a second?
Is there a second? For the purposes of discussion.
I'll second for the purposes of discussion.
Thank you. All right, then let's move into discussion. Does city staff have any opening remarks?
Well, you heard what Catherine had to say. She presented the ordinance to us. She kind of structured it to begin with. I know from some original comments that I had with Dan, there were some modifications made. You have 16 documents that staff has provided with a broad range of opinions. So I think we're going to let Paul start, and then we'll move to Dwayne, and then, let's start off. Dan, do you want to add anything on the ordinance?
Not at this time.
Okay.
There's a number of ways to institute such an ordinance. This the ordinance that's presented does identify all city roads, all city highways as ATV routes. And that's an appropriate way to proceed if that's what is desired. Ms. Bishop and I discussed this form and this ordinance quite a bit. I think it accomplishes the goals. I do think that there are alternatives that are available if the various boards and commissions see it as fit to amend or change what is stated. But at this point, I don't have any other comments than that.
So Paul, you want to go?
Thanks. And I'm going to be really brief here, but because I know there's going to be a lot of discussion here. Let me first of all just give you a little context or a point of reference for me. Not too many years ago, my son was seriously injured in an ATV accident. Now, he was over 16, had all the requirements, that sort of thing. He still has the effects of that, pretty much messed up some of his high school athletic career. So that stays with me. And then, of course, our family was good friends with the family of the young lady that was killed a couple weeks ago. So I have a very personal point of view on this. But I also understand that I have to kind of set that aside temporarily and talk about this in a very practical manner. And the memo that I put together really is just a request to go slow on this, steady but slow. I'm not saying we need to nix the concept or anything like that, but really take a look at what we're doing and make sure that we're doing it the best for all of Lake Mills. In my memo, I just posed a number of questions that I think we should consider as we go through this. I realize that the people that really would like to see this go through would like to see it happen as quickly as possible. I don't think there's an urgent need to pass this. I think there is an urgent need to really take a look at it and make sure that what we're doing is, as I say, best for the community. From a public works standpoint, you know, the signage and some of the wear and tear on the streets, that sort of thing, how we design our streets is a big deal. Do we now start designing our streets to add extra lanes like we do for bicycles, that sort of thing? So I really want us to take that part of it seriously. From a safety standpoint, you're going to hear quite a bit from Dwayne, who has been studying this very in depth and has some very good information about that. And I think that anytime we add another type of vehicle to our streets, whether it be mopeds or bicycles or whatever, that we really have to take a look at that closely. I understand also that stuff happens. You know, if we banned every kind of vehicle, we'd have people jogging into each other. You know, I get that. So it's not like we're going to solve all the problems or we're going to keep everybody safe, but we certainly have to structure this in such a way that it is as safe as it possibly can be and that people understand what we're trying to accomplish by taking a close look at allowing ATVs, UTVs, however you describe them on our streets. So again, just wrapping it up, my point is let's not rush into it. Let's go steady. Let's make sure that what we're doing is truly effective. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. I think Steve said it in his memo, and I'm just going to highlight some of the things that are in my memo. I know, really, I sat down to look at it from a research standpoint to find out, you know, how big of a topic is this? Steve's comment was some of the considerations are safety, liability, law enforcement, maintenance, tourism, and community acceptance. And I think those are all valid points, and I think we should explore those more, as Paul is suggesting. From an engineering standpoint, I struggle with just opening this up without considering the safety aspects of this. You know, some types of users are placed at a higher risk, those being pedestrians and bicyclists, by any interaction between multiple different modes of transportation. And as you know, there's many users. There's pedestrians, there are cars, trucks, motorcycles, bicycles, and they're all limited within the space of the right-of-way. The right-of-way also has place for storing snow in the winter, facilities, utility facilities and structures that are there, and of course parking cars. And so all of those different uses and now this new use are all fighting for a limited space. And there are options. There are options which are very costly, which is reconstructing streets to accommodate all of these modes, reconstructing streets to allow it, or adding right-of-way to allow some of these uses in a safer manner. Just last month, we talked about bike paths on East Lake Street. And I think we talked about it a little bit, that if we did consider that option, we were talking about removing parking lanes in order to do that safely. So right there is another example of removing one mode or one use in the right-of-way for another use. And that is a decision, of course, that this board and the council will have to grapple with. But I think it drives home the point that we are introducing another use in this case for a limited space of use. I could go on a number of topics that I've outlined in my memo, and maybe maybe we should just get into that discussion as those questions come up, and we can take those topic by topic. But if you want any particular item, I'd be more than happy. At this point, as was alluded to, I am not in favor of this motion or this ordinance. I think there are safety issues and other concerns that, in my mind, outweigh some of the other factors. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Dwayne. And in our packet was other information, including from the police chief and various other bodies.
Can I ask a quick question? This is Bennett Rupplinger. So Catherine Bishop indicated earlier on in her comments that other municipalities in our area have done this and have opened up usage of their roads to ATVs and UTVs. What information do we have on their experience, both pros and cons, if any?
I personally have not called different communities. We do have a list in the packet from the Quad County Runners of areas within the townships and cities and villages that in the surrounding area. Not all. In fact, in the memo, the jurisdiction, there's a highlight in one of the tables. Town of Lake Mills, Town of Ashland, and Town of Waterloo and surrounding area currently have an ordinance. I believe Dan forwarded a document that was provided to us this weekend, and it was actually an article for the town of Koshkonong. And in that article, they are looking at a public hearing to bring this to the public in the near future for the town of Koshkonong. But within that article, it also stated that the city of Fort Atkinson staff was opposed to this, and in fact was asking the town of Koshkonong to eliminate any streets that head into the city for this very reason, so that they aren't having to grapple with this issue when the township of Koshkonong potentially would have routes right up to the edge of Fort Atkinson. And I believe that document was forwarded to you today.
Yes. Go ahead.
I don't have all the research, but I know that Jefferson County adopted, allowing ATVs, UTVs on county highways, I believe about a year ago, little more than a year ago. And then I think our surrounding townships followed right after. So they're all pretty recent. If we're looking for, their experiences so far, I don't know that there's been a very long time, for them to assess that.
There was a chat from Catherine about suspending rules to add input. What is the board's what's the process to go for it? I'm interested to hear Catherine's take on it.
If there's no objections, then by unanimous consent as the chairperson, I would allow that to happen. And did you have a specific question, Bennett, for Catherine?
I think she was just going to comment about what the experience was with the municipalities and areas that have okayed this. I am okay with suspending the rules to allow Catherine to give her take on it or her evidence.
So and my specific question then to Catherine would be, not just town municipalities or counties, but specifically cities or villages?
Okay, I hear your question. I don't have specifics to that, but to go back to Mr. Rupplinger's original question about what have the surrounding communities done, the background I wanted to add was that some of them, and I apologize for not having this specific list, did have original sunset clauses in their ordinances, whether it was a year or 2 years, when they first adopted this back in 2018 and 2019. And those sunset clauses said, we'll review this in a year, and if there are issues or we don't like it, then this ordinance allowing UTVs is repealed. And those ordinances have not been repealed, even though those timeframes have lapsed. And so those cities and municipalities have considered a lot of the issues that I'm sure you're thinking about, that the council will think about, and have really found it to not be as big of a problem as they thought it was going to be. So that's why those ordinances are still in effect. And then real quick to Dwayne's point, if I may, about reconstructing the streets, I don't believe that that's necessary in this case because UTVs and ATVs, the way their use is allowed per Wisconsin statutes is that they are a part of traffic. So they're moving in the lane of traffic. They have to abide by all of the signage of a regular vehicle. And so we wouldn't need an additional lane like a bike lane. And so I just wanted to add that too. And thank you for letting me speak again.
Just a quick follow-up question, Catherine. So I know we kind of spoke about how ATVs and UTVs were allowed in more rural areas, right? County of Jefferson County, and then like surrounding townships. Is there any example of a small city or village comparable to Lake Mills trying this that we have available? And maybe you don't have it
I'm
right
certainly
offhand.
happy to address that. I did do an audit of municipalities really throughout Wisconsin and their treatment of this issue. Juneau, for instance, has passed an ordinance that allows all city streets to be recognized as ATV routes. Tomah, Wisconsin, for instance, I think those are similarly situated to the city of Lake Mills. There are a number of mid-sized jurisdictions that are cities that do have similar ordinances. What I found is that there may be some spatial difference. There aren't that many or any that I could find that are specifically on this I-94 corridor. So not the city of Lake Mills at this point, not the city of Watertown at this point. However, I mean, Tomah is at I-90 and I-94, and they do have all city streets. So the ordinance like this has been passed in other cities. What you see is kind of, if you look at a map of Wisconsin, and is this an attachment in the? There's a link that's been provided to a map in Wisconsin that shows all jurisdictions that have adopted a similar ordinance. And you definitely see a high volume of such ordinances in the west and northwest of the state. And then kind of the central state, there's stuff that's filling in. And the eastern portions of the state, there's stuff that's filling in. So I think that's kind of the direction with which these ordinances have been presented from the Northwoods on south, as opposed to the opposite.
I can
Mr.
also
Drescher,
comment,
answer
Bennett, that Wisconsin Dells has an ordinance. Theirs does have street restrictions. Not all streets are used. Same with the city of Jefferson in Jefferson County. They have routes. So I think they have 2 roads that are designated as ATV routes. Johnson Creek also put it to referendum, and it failed at referendum.
Bennett, this is Dwayne. On page 4 of my document, there are 2 links. And I believe the first one is, you really can't zoom in very well, but the second one, it's more interactive, it's more GIS based.
Thanks, Dwayne. Appreciate it.
I think one of the other questions that's been asked is what kind of information or data has been able to be collected on what's happening, and there's really not a lot. I mean, Dwayne's probably provided you as much as anybody's seen in the state of Wisconsin, and in our area, there hasn't been a lot. The vehicles are extremely susceptible to rolling over, and that tends to be the main accident that occurs with them. Generally, that's happening at 35 miles an hour and over. Where it would occur in the city is if they get over to the side and they hit a curb, those big bubble tires and the unbalance, they hit a curb, especially our 6-inch curbs, they have a tendency to roll. So those are kinds of the issues that you would see. The number of vehicles that have been used so far, especially in like the city of Lake Mills, have been pretty minimal. You see them on County Highway V, but nothing in the city. So they're a kind of odd situation too, that half the data, if they're involved in an accident with a car, it goes into the WISDOT information base, but if it doesn't involve a car, it goes into the DNR database. So you get split information that's hard to pull together and get accurate information. Particularly the DNR database, because they don't give a lot of information on, what happened and if the person ended up in a hospital or what the eventual results were. It's more there was an accident.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think this is a fascinating issue because it seems that these vehicles that, we have a lot of information from DNR and from Paul and Dwayne about, their design and intention for off-road use. And they're regulated by DNR, I think, because they sort of started as recreational vehicles, right? And now it seems like there's kind of a trend toward more people wanting to use them for transportation or maybe using them for both. And so I'm finding it a little challenging to think about them under the framework of the DNR regulations, which are telling us to be cautious because they're off-road vehicles and, think carefully about where they're allowed. But yet, so many communities have surrounding us have allowed them on streets and roads, and that they, more for that transportation use. And I think this ordinance contemplates the same thing where, anybody right from their driveway can go right out on their street and use it. So that's more of a transportation use, I think. And I guess the reason I'm bringing this up a little bit is I think we have a history in our community of doing transportation planning. And Paul, you kind of laid this out in your memo, where, what are the transportation needs and desires of the community, and therefore where should we lay out, certain kinds of streets for different volume, for different uses. And so to me, it seems like it lends itself toward that kind of evaluation, like how does this fit in our overall transportation plan? If there's interest out there, how do we want to fit that in? And I was interested, particularly Paul, in your comment about, well, do people maybe want a trail or a designated route through the community to connect to other routes outside the community? Or does everybody want it right from their driveway? I've certainly talked to people in the community that don't want them at all in the community, and others that, maybe own one and would be interested. So I don't know where that leads us, but I just was kind of reflecting on kind of the shift from recreational use to transportation and how that now is, something for us to need to think about.
If I may, I wasn't here for any statements. I came late, so I wasn't here for Ms. Bishop's statement specifically. And what I would like to add, in addition to the statements that Ms. Curler just made, are that there are cutouts for ATV use on basically all roadways right now, highways, et cetera, for husbandry, as farm implements, for snow removal, for other activities that don't contemplate the exact same use as routes specifically. So I think that's a very important issue, because there must be some history with regard to the use of ATVs for those practices that have been more longstanding and kind of more present and more robust through time. I certainly know people that run businesses that use ATVs to remove snow from driveways, and they do have relative free rein when engaged in that activity on highways. There are rules that say if it's not a route, you must be as far right on that right-of-way as possible when operating in that manner, and that's a safety mechanism. But there is a historical use of ATVs in a number of different ways, aside from local traffic or specifically recreational use. So I do feel like there is probably some more robust information out there. Bringing it all together has proven difficult at this point.
I have two specific questions or concerns about the ordinance. One is as I understand it, it's ATV routes are allowed on all city streets, but they're only implemented or legal on the ones that are signed, correct? So if it's not signed, it's not an ATV route. If it is signed, it is an ATV route.
Well,
ATV route.
my understanding there under Wisconsin statute 23.33, which does govern over recreational vehicles, such vehicles in the state of Wisconsin, under 8E specifically, cities are allowed to designate all city highways, all city streets as ATV routes. And what would be required then is notice at the entrance of cities and potentially the exit of cities or a municipality at the exit if there is a change, if the next municipality over does not allow ATV usage on city streets. So I don't believe that each and every city street would need to be signed at the entrance. If all city streets are designated as routes, at the entrance you could erect a sign. However, if you do change that and you elect certain streets as routes, then I believe those individual routes would then have to be signed. So Ferry Drive, yes. Main Street,
So
no.
it's unclear to me then what the intent of this ordinance is, because is the intent, there's two ways of doing it, it's my understanding. You can sign specific routes, or you can sign the major routes into the city.
And
Which is
my
this
understanding
proposing?
of this ordinance is that it identifies all city streets and highways as routes, which would require signage at the entrance of the city on such a street. So on 89 specifically at the north, on 89 specifically at the south, on Highway A, Topol Street at the south, on Highway B coming from the east from Johnson Creek, for instance.
Okay. Then my follow-on question to that is having State Highway 89 be a route requires DOT approval. And so is that plan, if this ordinance would move forward, would that be something that the city would be moving
I
forward
believe
with?
that's contemplated in the ordinance and it's identified as a requirement, yes.
And if the state did not permit that as a route, then how does the signage occur then, that everything's allowed except that road?
Yeah, the DOT does maintain jurisdiction over state highways. It is identified as a connecting highway at that point when it's identified as Main Street. I've struggled with this issue myself as to whether or not the DOT really does maintain control over Main Street, Lake Mills, when it's not identified as State Highway 89. I've come to the conclusion that yes, DOT permission would be required. I haven't seen many circumstances, I don't know of any circumstances where a numbered highway has been an ordinance has been passed, a numbered highway has been requested to be identified as a route, presented to the DOT, and then that has been denied. I'm not familiar with that circumstance. I believe that there are examples of other local state highways that are identified as Main Street or Lake Street or something to that effect that have in fact been identified as local routes.
Are the state highways in Jefferson County and in the townships routes right now?
I think that's a good question. Jefferson County's ordinance says that all county roads are routes, and State Highway 89 north to south is obviously not a county road, it is a state road.
So from Staff's current opinion is that State Highway 89 outside of the city is not a ATV route.
That would be my opinion, but I'm not
Steve's taking
exactly
his
positive on that matter. I've certainly seen ATVs operating on that route, on that road.
But that doesn't make it-
And I've certainly seen them operating for other activities than, like passing through from
Yeah.
Lake Mills to Jefferson, for instance.
So
I mean, for
if
husbandry, for farm implements and such like that.
May I make a statement on this?
Yes.
So I'm thinking initially of the city of Waterloo. Highway 89 runs up there, and right when you enter Waterloo, it does have the sign saying all city streets or whatever are ATV ordinances. And I would think 89 continues to be a state highway there, but I'm also getting a note from a representative from the Quad County Runners that I want to let the board know about. And he says the state pre-approves state roads under 35s in their statute if approved by the municipality. So our roads in Lake Mills are under 35. And then he goes on to say state 89 and state 19 in Waterloo. Okay, here we go. Were approved by Waterloo ordinance. So I hope that gives a little more information on these questions here.
And we already agreed that we could do it within the city of Lake Mills for those roads if it was designated. Mark's question is how do they get to 89 on the south side? And that would, County Highway A would be the only way that we believe
Right.
they could access.
I think that's right.
Because it
If for
couldn't
some
be
reason
on-
the county, at some point in time, like in November, they're up for review, so let's say in November they decide not to renew, there would be no way you could access the south side of the city from outside the city. You would have to travel down there and then travel back and find another way out. Or illegally travel, which we already know happens all the time.
And that also applies to the north side of the city, north of the freeway, where 89 is not in the city, correct?
Correct.
If I may, on both of those two topics, while the state statute does allow you to sign that way, DNR guidelines in my memo, basically it says merely placing one sign at the village limits and attempting to notify the public that the entire set of roads within the jurisdiction are considered routes will not be sufficient. It goes on, but basically the guidelines for signing trails that Public Works will ultimately, that Paul and his staff will ultimately have to review in order to sign this if you decide. The guidance from the DNR is basically saying, do not do it that way. I just want to make sure everybody's clear. It's just like the state saying, and I'm going to add, just like the state saying it's okay to be on a road, but all of the manufacturers are saying, do not use this on a road. So there are a
I'm
number
gonna
of things
have to-
that are conflicting here.
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I checked the site where that language comes from. First off, that's from 1999, and there's an updated publication since then. And the updated publication doesn't mention the language you just cited, that merely placing signs at the entrances to the city is not sufficient. Wisconsin statutes, I believe, are controlling, and other regulations have been updated since then, and they would permit us to put signs in as proposed on the map that you were given with these agenda items.
Go ahead.
I guess I have a question about costs that maybe is also tied to that. If there's a more current publication, we should probably get that, and/or contact the ATV regulators at DNR, and maybe we can get some clarification on this point, because it does seem like a handful of signs at the main entrances to the city and more signage, there could be a big difference in cost. So I think it would be really good for us to get that clarified. You know, what exactly are the requirements, so that we don't have any kind of liabilities, and so we understand the costs. But I guess related to the cost, that's another area that I had some concerns. I appreciate that we have a trail group that's willing to, pay for the cost of signs, and it sounds like, at least the way the ordinance is drafted, that they're interested in even helping install them. It seems highly unusual to me, and I think that if the city wants to allow ATVs and UTVs, we should be prepared to understand all those costs, short-term and long-term for maintenance, and being prepared to pay those. And I'm just not sure, I mean, I'm sure Quad Country Runners is a very reliable, responsible organization, but, you know, how would we enforce that? Like, if we ask them to pay for it and they say, oh, sorry, we didn't have a good fundraiser this year, so we can't afford it. Well, you know, I feel like that could be a little problematic, and I'm just wondering if we should deal with that a different way, but also just generally want to try to understand what are the real costs that the city would incur.
I would certainly like Ms. Bishop to comment on this. One thing that I took into consider in review of the ordinance was the county's ordinance, which has a similar clause. It doesn't specifically identify one group, but it says the ATV, UTV club, or its succeeding group will be responsible for all costs of all ATV, UTV signs on all town roads and for all cost of their proper installation and future maintenance. Your secondary question about how do you enforce that, I think that is that's a legitimate issue. As long as they're in existence and you can pass that on and they're acting in good grace, then that's effective. The second that they're not, I'm not sure that there really is anything. Once you've identified it as a route, the city is going to be responsible for maintaining and repairing or whatever would come up if routes change or something like that, probably the change over there. But my understanding from Ms. Bishop is that this group has agreed to do this, and they're very supportive of this because it does benefit them and serve them in what their goals ultimately are. So it is probably an issue worthy of some more consideration, but I think there is good information there anyway.
Ms. Curler, I'll go ahead and speak quickly on that. So yes, Quad County Runners, my understanding is that they've put up the signs in all of the surrounding municipalities as well and covered that cost. If you're looking for their goodwill or good faith on this matter, I don't have a dollar number for you, and certainly that's something I could maybe ask them for. It would come down to where are we putting the signs and how many are they ordering. So the correspondence I got from the Quad County Runner representative explains that the 24 by 24 green signs that are required that say ATV route would be paid for by the club. He said for the signs on State Road 89, his explanation is the state produces those signs and then bills the city. And then what they've done is that the city would then forward that invoice to the club, and that's how that's taken care of.
Thank you. Are there any other thoughts, Dwayne or Paul, on other costs that you might anticipate, either short-term or long-term?
Yeah, I haven't explored the cost, but I guess my concern here would be that's kind of a unique precedent that we'd be setting where an organization could purchase signs that are put up. You know, they're put up in the cities right away. Who then maintains them? You know, if they're damaged or if they fade, that sort of thing. So I think that all can be worked out, but I'd like to know that up front. So to me, the signage is, it's important because it designates what are the ATV routes and that sort of thing. The cost, I think, is going to be fairly minimal in the overall scheme of things, but then it's the ongoing maintenance and that sort of thing that is more important to me, and who owns the signs once they're up.
The signs would be donated to the city and become city property upon installation.
And so then, in that regard, they do become our responsibility to maintain and change when they fade, that sort of thing, right? So there would be an ongoing cost to that.
The ordinance said that could be billed back to the club, a
Yes.
maintenance cost.
There would be some time associated with reviewing
Sure.
those signs on a regular basis. And we talked, Lisa, you brought up costs. I mean, there's other costs that are out there, not just the signage. And that kind of ties into how many calls are we going to get that have to be investigated from a nuisance standpoint to a restoration to even the police chief mentions that he's had 2 incidences where they've attempted to stop someone and they've driven through private property or through park property. So how much damage, how many nuisance calls is staff going to be responding to in the future related to this activity? Very hard to predict at this point. but realize that it's time for multiple different departments, Parks Department, staff, Public Works staff, probably the neighborhood service officer, as well as the police department to respond to these types of calls and complaints, from noise to damage to terraces and parks. The cemetery, they have been seen in the cemetery. No guarantee that the damage that was recently occurred in the cemetery was related to one of these vehicles. But I want to caution that it isn't just the cost of the sign. It is staff time and probably some restoration costs over time that will be associated with this ordinance.
And when we say signs, we, of course, mean the poles and the brackets and the equipment to get it into the ground and those types of things.
Sure.
So it's a little bit more than just paying for the 24 by 24 sign. But that's all part of a sign.
Quick question here. I want to shift gears a little bit because Steve, you brought up an example of Johnson Creek, and that went to referendum. I just looked it up. It looks like 2018. It failed on a vote of 55 to 45. It was a non-binding referendum. I feel like everyone's going to have some opinions on this. My biggest concern is probably the nuisance aspect in terms of like whether people are, there are going to be pros and cons to it, obviously, but where are the people of Lake Mills at in terms of this, particularly our city residents? What are our options for a non-binding referendum that kind of mirrors what Johnson Creek did 4 years ago?
No, I think it's doable. We could hold a non-binding referendum that is advisory in nature.
How soon could that, would that be something we could do for the November election coming up? Or is that too tight of a timeline?
No, you could do it for the November election. We still have time. November election will be a very busy election, a very contentious election. So I don't know.
Good turnout, though.
Yeah, you'll have a good turnout.
I appreciate your thought there, Bennett, and maybe there's some other ways too. That would be one option. Another way would be to hold a public hearing like Kashkanang is doing, or somehow build it into the comprehensive planning process, have a special session on this, see what, just get a little more public input, because I think that is also one thing that we really don't have a good feel for. What does the community and the residents of our community, what do they want? What do they think? It wasn't on our comprehensive plan survey that went out recently. So, I don't think we have a good feel for what the community wants.
In general, I think for issues like this, there's some people that are very much in favor. There's some people very much against. There's a vast majority in the middle that don't have a strong opinion. And in general, if a change is proposed, people generally don't like change. So there's a general negative drag to any proposal. So, and it's not, it wouldn't be surprising. You get a different answer depending on how you ask the question as well. So we can do it. It'll be another piece of data. It is what it is. So you can also say, I've also heard the statements, especially the city council, you're elected to make decisions. I've heard that said of elected officials in the past as well.
Right.
I, for one, if it's non-binding, I think it gives us a good feel. It can be part of the discussion and it's going to get it on people's radar. I think there was a good comment made that it wasn't in the comprehensive plan or wasn't like in survey question or anything like that. This is the first time hearing of this issue before this meeting, and I've seen UTVs and ATVs outside of town. They're becoming more and more prevalent, particularly UTVs. Those things are like little cars. Some of them, particularly up north. I think we've made some comments about that before. I would be in favor of going the route of a non-binding referendum just to get a pulse of where people are at with this. If it's anything, I'm surprised that it went down in Johnson Creek the way it did. So I'd be curious about where things would stand in Lake Mills with a non-binding referendum.
I wonder if we could build on a couple of the things that you've been asking about, Bennett, and maybe ask the staff to pull together some additional information about the ordinances that are in the neighboring communities. I know I've seen some documentation that there are some requirements in the Jefferson County ordinance, some of the other ordinances that aren't in the city's proposed ordinance, and maybe those would be worth looking at. Dwayne, I think you had some of those possible ideas listed at the end of your memo. So if we could see where, what some other communities are doing along those lines, not that we have to duplicate theirs necessarily, but it might just give us something more, then at our next meeting, we could kind of look through those and evaluate, do we want to recommend some kind of public input? Recommend that the city council pursue that before going further. If for some reason the council doesn't want to take that step, then we could also recommend, what else do we think should be included in the ordinance from the Public Works Board's perspective? What do you guys think about that?
But, the town and county ordinances are a bit different than city-type ordinances. So they have things like speeds not higher than 35, which is not applicable to the city of Lake Mills. So I think there's potential for other additional requirements in the ordinance. I don't know what they are. I don't know. Like Catherine said, there's some of those things in those other ordinances are repeats of state law, so they're, I think, not really needed. But we certainly can look at that.
It seems to me like the jury's still out largely in our area, and because particularly Jefferson County, I mean, that was relatively recent, but this is not a new thing. I mean, I'm one that even if we had some experience outside of Wisconsin or outside of our area, and also Lake Mills is unique, you know what I mean, compared to some of the lake changes things. I mean, it becomes more recreational versus, I think Dan mentioned earlier, you have obviously ATV usage for, for construction or for farming and things like that. Completely kind of a different use case within the city of Lake Mills. And maybe we have to go outside of Wisconsin to try to find kind of, examples that would be more tailored to what our potential experience would be.
Wisconsin Dells sounds like a good, they have a freeway, they have tourism, and you said they have an ATV ordinance, right?
Yes.
So that's one example that we could look at more. And any other cities, if we can get maybe at least three or something, and I don't know if there's going to be anything good in them, but we could take a look.
I know that Dan's already mentioned Toma, and I know Mauston has one. So we could pull those together. The one I found most comprehensive was Red Wing, Minnesota.
So most comprehensive does not mean best, though, right?
No, it doesn't mean best. It means it covered. They had a lot of words in it.
Well, that's why you like it, Steve.
Yeah.
So, but in my opinion, the ordinance kind of went through all the reasoning behind why each decision was made, and so it was more of a policy statement maybe than an ordinance. But it was. I thought it was very comprehensive.
Oh, interesting. I think Greg is on the phone, but we haven't heard anything from him. Greg, are you following along? Do you have any thoughts?
I'm totally following along. You haven't heard from me, but my concerns are a little safety. I do think the police chief had some great points matching up with Jefferson County ordinance. I think one of the other points he made is if this is illegal, it'll be more enforcement issues than legalizing it. And it appears that the state legislature is going to be taking up the issue anyway. As long as there's safety features, headlights, taillights, seat belts, I think, all of those items are, I would be concerned about. At first, as I've been thinking through the issue, listening to the discussion, first I was thinking maybe just connecting, maybe having a north-south route and an east-west route connecting to other routes. But then once I started to listen a little bit more, I thought it might be more cumbersome and just easier to open it up to all streets, just as similar to this because of the signage and the enforcement issues. I also think that the non-binding referendum is the way to go in this case. There's just a lot of things to think about, and I think having public input is certainly prudent at this stage. That's what I have.
So I guess
Hello?
I'll make a motion that we table this till our next meeting and ask the staff to provide some information on the ordinances in our neighboring communities, as well as some other good examples that you feel might be out there. And then we could also talk about whether we want to, recommend anything from those, and also whether we want to recommend some public input to the council. So my motion is to table till next meeting for those reasons.
Yep. Is there a second?
I will second that. This is Bennett.
So motion and second to table the motion. Roll call vote, please. Roll call, please.
Ms. Curler?
Aye.
Mr. Polachek?
Aye.
Mr. Rupplinger?
Aye.
Mr. Picard?
Aye.
Motion passed 4-0.
Just one quick follow-up. In order to get on November referendum, when does that decision need to be made?
Middle August?
And certainly the city council can make that happen if they so desire. All right, then. Moving on to item 7, discussion on capital improvement projects 2023 budget. And there we have a 3-page summary in our packet.
I'll jump in here. I think in this case, our intention, if you will, was to present this to you at this meeting, respond to any questions, initial questions that you have, requests for more information, that sort of thing, and then come back with it again at the August meeting for a final discussion and recommendation. So,
Yep, that's correct.
so are there things you want to highlight, Dwayne?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If
Yeah,
we're gonna,
you bet.
if we're going to end at that, I'll just add a couple things. When reviewing items that are in STP funded, we should probably note, so South CP Avenue, North CP Avenue, and West Lake Street in 25, 26, and 27. Those are all STP grants that we've applied for. The total amount of the project is in the CIP. In each of those cases, there would be a reimbursement from the federal government of 0.56, 1.39, and 0.56 million in each of those years. So on the street portion. Of course, on the water and sewer, that's not an eligible part of that project for that 80-20 funding, and it's only on the street side. But be aware that if those projects or if that funding is not made available, the likelihood that those either drop from the CIP or move to a later year. It's not that the need is not going to is going away. It just realize that the number may be inflated in those years because of that funding.
So for the street reconstruction projects here, this also includes utility reconstruction for all of those street projects?
Not within the street portion. They're listed separately, so like electric.
Yes.
But each one of them has a portion that's related to the project.
Right.
So if you look at College Street, electric utility, wastewater utility, water, and streets all have a College Street project.
Right. And was the condition of those utilities reviewed? Determining that they needed to be replaced?
We review the one that's the highest on the list, and then we utilize other historical data, so like the LSL study
Yeah.
and the schedule for certain sanitary sewers need to be jetted more often because they have more problems. So that type of information plays into our initial, but we don't actually go in and do any televising or any other work until the year before. So it's, but most of these streets, if you look at the roadway condition and you look at the age of the infrastructure under it, it's likely to need to be replaced. Probably the one that's the lowest is electric.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, but there's always, you have to move poles and you have to reset transformers and you have to do, sometimes you need to put in a new line here or there. So we always schedule some dollars in there for
Right. These are estimates, and they could go down.
They could go down.
They might-
This year they went up because,
Yeah.
inflation and the
Way to think
supply.
positive, Mark.
Supply all hit
I
and
know.
make a big difference in how it goes. In fact, we've allowed more plastic water main this year than ever because you just can't get ductile iron. So
Plus, it's better. We'll see. We'll see, right?
yeah, it's like PFAS. Pretty soon we'll have plastic floating around in our water and we'll have to figure out how to remove all that.
Don't start a rumor now,
Don't,
Steve.
yeah,
Yeah, as I say, you realize you're in a public meeting, right?
Yeah, I realize it.
I would just state that in some cases, and I'm thinking of Grove Street, South CP Avenue, et cetera, the water and sewer actually drive those being on the list. So that, there are some areas we know need some attention, and so we treat them that way.
But to go back to your original question, this ongoing list, I believe that you saw last year at this time, the listing in order is pretty much the same. We evaluated that College Street was still probably the highest priority for '23. We didn't reorganize the years, but that's easily done within the capital program. If you feel between now and the next meeting that we should consider one of these separately. The one that jumps out at me that we may want to think about pushing back right now is Fremont Street. Many of the LSLs have been replaced on that street. We did do a little bit of an overlay scratch coat about a year ago, and it's holding up very nicely. So if any, that would maybe be pushed back to a later date, that would be the one that jumps out in my mind. But again, right now, it's really 5 years out, so we didn't change that decision.
And you've asked for funds for that?
So far out, we haven't.
So the capital improvement plan is a 5-year plan, and it's always a dynamic plan.
Yeah.
We're always looking at it every year. In fact, sometimes we're evaluating it every
So my question
6 months.
was that one that the federal funds
No,
grants? No.
It was
Fremont
not.
is not.
It
Okay.
was not. That was one of the.
That's sorry, that was my questions.
Fremont was originally one of those ones with a lot of lead service laterals, but so many people took advantage of the grant on that street that
Yeah.
we have so many patches that we eventually milled it and overlaid it, so it's probably not as high a priority. The other issue there is that Lake and College Street and Fremont all have substantial stormwater, they're probably the largest stormwater areas in the city that drain to the lake. And so we've been putting in storm scepters to improve the stormwater drainage. And so that's kind of one of the other reasons that was on the list relatively early, was to kind of tie all those stormwater systems together.
So the east side drains down the hill to Madison.
Madison.
And that comes into the creek, correct?
Well,
Via
it
the
runs-
east- via
it
the
runs
North Main
into the
Street.
Rock Lake Activity Center, kind of. And then it kind of drains out to North Main Street, and eventually it might get down.
My understanding is that those were tied into the big North Main Street.
They were,
Correct.
in some form or fashion.
Yeah, that was a big pipe.
And-
Right down here.
Correct.
Yep, it's not big enough.
6 feet or whatever.
When we're talking about College and Fremont, we are talking about the western portion
Yeah.
that drains to the
Right.
lake.
Yep.
Some other, and I know that both Paul and Steve have kind of mentioned it, but I'm looking back at the spreadsheet that we've used to kind of rank those about a year ago. LSLs, number of water main breaks, age of the water main, age of the sewer, whether or not, as Steve mentioned, whether or not the sewer department's having problems and having to routinely clean these lines. Other things, is it close to schools, businesses, might have a little bit more impact than, say, just a residential street. And of course, the surface rate, the PACER ratings of all these streets are 2s and 3s and are in need of repair. I hope that helps.
I noticed the bottom line, there's quite a jump, for the 5 years, and it looks like one contributing factor to that under the wastewater sanitary sewer is a couple of expensive lift stations. That's just sort of unavoidable, right? That's just sort of the timing of when you need to do those projects, and they're a little more costly.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Because I was just trying to look at, is there a way to shave some of the peaks? But I think, your equipment comes due to be replaced when it does, unless things change. So you kind of do have to just plan that out, and some years are going to cost more than others.
Yeah, correct, to a certain extent. And there are certain things that drive this that are, to a certain extent, out of our control. Is in regard to vehicles, we have a vehicle replacement schedule, and we do try to balance that from year to year so that it's at approximately the same every year. But as you see, there's at least 3 trucks in there that are really expensive now. We're looking at a $450,000 electric bucket truck. Not so long ago, that was $200,000. So we're not only seeing timing of replacing these vehicles, but the cost is just going crazy. And also from just a process standpoint, if we were to order a new bucket truck today, it would be 24 months before we could get it. And so what the price is going to do between now and then, we're not sure. Plus, it's going to mean that we'll have to carry funds over to be sure that we've got the funds to pay for it. There's a bucket truck, a digger truck, there's a vac truck for the sewer. Some of these other pieces of equipment makes it really tough, number one, to budget, and it's a little dicey making sure that the vehicles truly do last as long as we need them to. So I think just from, again, that's the process, but from an overall standpoint, our vehicle replacement schedule is really going to get out of whack, and I guess we have to be ready for that. My last comment, then I'll be quiet, is that we know there are some tough budget years coming up, and so we were cognizant of that as we went through this. This is our best guess right now as to what things are going to cost and what we're going to need when.
And to your point, Lisa, the lift stations, this is from staff as well, and their concerns on 3 or 4 of the stations that they see, and you note that they are out in the later years of the 5-year plan, but they are having concerns now. And so the idea was, let's make sure everyone is aware that those concerns are there, and these costs may be coming sooner if there is a unforeseen failure.
On that note, specifically the Sandy Beach lift station, which looks like it's for 2007 or 27, do you anticipate that would be able to be timed with the phasing of, the other utility work that needs to be done down there?
Exactly.
Okay.
Again, CIP is dynamic, and if council would decide to move ahead with any portion of that area of Sandy Beach Park, we would look to include that.
Maybe move it up or whatever, but it's okay. But right now, at least it has placeholder on the plan.
Correct.
Got it, okay.
Thanks.
And it all depends too on, is it a total replacement or not? Because you can do all the work in the park without necessarily replacing the lift station. The lift station, you lift the lid off and you do all the work underneath. So you could wait a year or two after the other work is done to be able to upgrade the pumps and all the other equipment. But if you're pulling out the entire manhole, then then it's a totally different story.
Yeah, okay. So is this just discussion tonight, then you don't need a decision from us?
Yep.
Right, or recommendation? Okay.
Correct. I think we were looking more so if you had comments, if there's more detail on any item, or if you're looking that maybe we should be moving a certain project to a certain year because of any reason that we have seen or we haven't seen.
Looks good to me.
Yeah.
All right. If no further discussion on the capital projects, we'll move on to item 8, the recommendations for future agendas, and it sounds like we're going to have a busy August.
Yes, you are. So no one's allowed to not show up. That's a correct sentence. But yeah, certainly the wastewater issues, CIP will come back, ATV will come back. The street maintenance program will be part of the discussion. I'm missing one, I can't think of what it is right now.
Mike?
Bike lanes, thank you. That was the one I was thinking of, but that's another one, yes. Yeah, so it will be a good full August, no doubt about it.
I
wanted to
just
bring up
wanna-
Oh, go ahead, Bennett.
Oh, no, go ahead with your point, and then I'll go. You're good.
Well, I wanted to bring up a topic that the Public Works Board has worked on for a number of years that's kind of stalled, and that's the compost yard waste. And I wanted to just clarify any misunderstandings there might be and hope that we can follow up on a future meeting to keep moving it forward. I tried to kind of study the history of all of this, and frankly, I'm finding it tough to figure out exactly what's needed, to keep moving it forward. The Public Works Board's worked on it a number of times over the last 4 years, City Council, but most recently, the City Council, this current council, we approved the concept of $300,000 for land purchase in our 2022 budget. But when we were asked to authorize borrowing this May, I think I can speak for the rest of the council in saying we kind of wanted to know a little bit more, like, how is that going to be spent? What exactly is the project, and what point is it in the process? Not that we have to have a final plan that we're authorizing, but I think that's the reason that the borrowing didn't get approved, is that the council felt it wasn't clear exactly what is this borrowed money going to go for. So I was curious, Paul, if you have a thought on how we can, get that maybe back to the Public Work Board to sort of summarize what's been happening, make a recommendation to the council that then the council can act on that with a little more information.
Sure, and thank you for your heads up earlier so I could kind of plan my thoughts out here. But it's a project or an issue that has kind of ebbed and flowed. We get some momentum and then we back off, then we get some momentum and back off. Tell you what, you have a really good storm and the momentum picks up again. But I hope I can say this, but right now we are looking into it as part of the wastewater treatment plant. If there's a good fit, a good marriage there, if you will, we're also looking at some other sites. And so we've kind of gone back to a higher level and trying to establish, number one, how much land we do need, and then where are some good likely spots. And I think it's simply, quite honestly, you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, it's also a case of so many other issues have come up that this has gotten pushed back a little bit. But I do think a little refresher is good, and we can kind of re-examine where we're at and figure out where we want to go. So that's kind of a long answer to say is we haven't done a lot on this one yet. So.
Well, and again, I guess I just want to reassure my colleagues on the board that the council understands that that there's a need there, that there's a problem that needs to be addressed, and we have, generally set aside, the intention to fund it, but maybe just need some clarification. And if there's an opportunity to put it together with the wastewater treatment plant land acquisition, and maybe that's more cost effective, that might be a good path as well. So whatever you recommend as far as making sure that the council can help, and moving that forward, I would appreciate.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. Not a recommendation for a future item or anything like that, but I just wanted to let everyone know this is my final meeting. My family and I will be moving out of the area, and I just wanted to thank all my fellow board members and city staff as well. It's been a really good couple of years getting to know all of you, and just appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you, Bennett.
Thanks.
We'll
Good
miss
luck.
you.
Yeah, thanks.
Best wishes. Thanks for your service to Lake Mills.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Bennett.
So if Bennett is not at the next meeting, was that due for quorum?
Better hope Todd shows up.
Hopefully Todd will be
Yeah.
there, yeah.
And if any Lake Mills City residents out there would be interested in providing input to the city, the Public Works Board is a great place to do it. Applications on the website. All right, moving on then to item 9, adjournment. I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.